One farmer says, "Seems to me there was a tea party in Boston that was illegal too."
I have directed Secretary Connally to suspend temporarily the convertibility of the dollar into gold.
We shall seek to establish and maintain a dollar which will not change its purchasing and debt-paying power during the succeeding generation.
As anguished shrieks rose up from the floor of the New York Stock Exchange.
Government credit and government currency are really one and the same thing. A reserve of gold and a small reserve of silver.
Why do central banks hold it? Well, it's a form of reserves. Why don't they hold diamonds? Well, it's tradition, long-term tradition. Well, some people still think it's money.
Good evening. Welcome back to the Junius Maltby channel for a discussion on precious metals, specifically gold, wealth preservation over time, how to transport dynastic wealth to your heirs, posterity, and preserve your wealth against essentially anything, unaffected through the meddling of politics, men, war, turbulent times. Over the years, we've discussed everything from gold's role as money, real money, sound money, the ultimate extinguisher of debt here in the United States and abroad. We've covered everything from the very idea of saving in precious metals, the attempts of government to attack those who try to save in precious metals, specifically outlined in the article, A Federal War on Gold, a tremendous read that I think we should revisit every year, every couple of months. Gold being a time machine, transporting wealth to the future, as I just briefly touched on. And today we're going to really look at something that's an example of that. Every once in a while I take a break from the news and like to share an article, a discovery, an archaeological find that really paints the picture that we are talking about on how gold preserves wealth over time and how it truly is timeless, how nothing really ever takes that away from it no matter what happens. For 7,000 years, silver and gold have been money, 70 centuries, even longer. According to some, it could be even 10,000 years that these metals have been the medium of exchange for all people around the world. So as the debasement of the currencies we use today, those coupons, those paper receipts that are just ghosts, shadows even, that once represented an exchange ability with these precious metals, as this debasement accelerates and we see growing debt and we see the money supply expanding at rates never before even imagined, we ask ourselves, well, what does the future hold for this currency, this paper, these coupons, these receipts, this fiat that is only willed into existence by the governments themselves around the world, these central bank planners, the elite? What are they doing? Well, they're hoarding gold. We already know that. We've covered that extensively, and it's obvious in every single bit of evidence that's out there, whether it's the vaulting of gold by the elite that we covered in the fall, or just the movement between central banks, as well as the ETFs we see as gold flows out of them into physical form and gets hoarded into private vaults. Well, I want to share now a discovery that took place recently in China. And we're going to go through it and discuss this article and then again come back to what that means for us, what it represents. If you're looking at a pile of cash in your room or digits on a screen, your bank account and how much cash you might have in there. I'm going to ask you some very specific questions about that cash as far as what currency it's in and what you believe, because that's the most important thing here. It all comes down to faith and belief, where you place your belief in what medium of exchange and its lasting power, its strength to perform for you and to acquire goods and services. So join me as we journey to China and explore one of the greatest gold discoveries that I've read about. And I've covered some pretty exemplary treasures here on the channel in the past to paint this picture and to use it as an opportunity to see gold transporting wealth over time, the preservation of truly dynastic wealth. And here The headline, "Extremely Rare Imperial Golden Seal, weighing over 17 pounds and dating back 370 years, is unearthed in China." The extraordinary golden seal belonged to a Chinese royal family in the 1600s. The heavyweight power symbol was unearthed from an ancient battlefield. The treasure was deliberately shattered when the monarchy was overthrown. Chinese experts declared the discovery as the only one of its kind in the world. An extremely rare golden seal dating back to the 1600s that belonged to a Chinese emperor to be has been unveiled by archaeologists studying the remnants of a Ming Dynasty battlefield. Amazing images showed the discovery of the ancient power symbol, which weighs over 17 pounds and is 95% pure gold. Marks the first time researchers have found an item of gold treasure belonging to the prince and heir apparent of a Chinese imperial throne. Lead archaeologist Lu Xian, director of archaeometry at the Seichin Provincial Cultural Relics and Archaeology Research Institute, called it among the most significant finds in recent years and the only one of its kind in the world. The intricately carved stamp, which measures 10 by 10 centimeters, 4 inches by 4 inches, and has a pure gold handle in the shape of a tortoise, bears the words Shu Shi Zi Bao, meaning treasure of the Shu Prince. It is believed that the treasure was deliberately shattered when the monarchy was overthrown during a violent and bloody peasant uprising more than 370 years ago. The golden seal, along with around 10,000 other artifacts, were unveiled on Tuesday as Mr. Lu's concluded months of excavations at the Jiangkou Chenyin Historic Site, beginning on the 10th January this year. It was the third phase of a larger archaeological project which started in the spring of 2017 on the banks of the River Min in the Seichin town of Jiangkou. At the start of the low season in November 2019, teams of workers began surrounding the 5,000 square meter, 54,000 square foot dig site with an embankment before water was drained away to reveal the riverbed. Among the finds, more than 2,000 of which were of significant value, were gold, silver, and bronze coins, ingots, cutlery, adornments, and jewelry. But the golden seal, which was found shattered in 4 pieces, remains the most noteworthy. It is thought to have been in the possession of Zhang Zhanghong, also romanized as Cheng Xiancheng, who led the peasant revolt which conquered modern-day Seichin and its largest city of Chengdu in 1644 during the fall of the Ming Dynasty. The most plausible theory is that he had the seal split into 4 pieces to symbolize the end of the Ming Dynasty, Mr. Lu noted. Historical texts claim that when Zhang himself fled Chengdu in 1646 to escape the invading Manchus, founders of China's last empire, Qing, 1644 to 1912, he was ambushed by Ming loyalists, General Zhang Zan, losing around 1,000 ships as well as the treasures they contained into the depths of the Min River. Zhang, who was known as the Yellow Tiger, was slain by the Manchus in January of the following year. Mr. Lu said, "During Phase 3 of the dig, we made 2 very important observations. The first is that the artifacts were found deep in the rock and riverbed, meaning they had been there for a long period of time. This tells us that this section of the river is very likely the battlefield where Zhang Zhanghong and Zhang Zan crossed swords." All right, aside from the historical value to be placed on this chunk, this large 17-pound piece of gold, I know many of you are curious, well, what might be the actual monetary value today? Not monetary value, the value in currency, the value in the paper that we are forced to use on a day-to-day basis. With 14.58 or so troy ounces per pound, it comes in at around $421,000 if you just go with gold at $1,700 US per ounce. Now, the entirety of this treasure far exceeds just that 17-pound seal. There were 10,000 artifacts, many of them gold, and much of it in the purity of 95% pure gold, higher than the 92% many are used to seeing in crown gold or in U.S. gold coins. So we see here a significant mass of wealth from nearly 400 years ago that had sat submerged under a river. There's some beautiful ingots and bars and bracelets and coins and jewelry pictured right there, buried for, over, again, almost 400 years. Now, any paper currency that existed, because we do know that the Chinese circulated paper notes, even back then, had that been stolen or sunk into the bottom of the river, it would have decayed and no longer exist. Had somehow that paper been sealed in waxed casks and remained dry, protected from the river and from the elements, even brought to the surface today, those paper coupons would be nothing but historical relics and worth far less than the metal. And you could not exchange them for the metal they once represented. The same thing holds true today, or at any point in history for that matter. The paper that so many place their faith into is just representative of an exchange rate for goods and services that society seems to agree upon at the time, and that can expire at any moment. It can vanish with the wind of government fiat edicts, overnight revaluations and resets. It's happened throughout history. We've talked about the resets. We've talked about expired and extinct fiat currencies. And it's always been something I've been confused about, is how people can go on in a society, even in today especially, with no understanding of that looming threat, the potential for that. Always thinking that it can't happen to me, it can't happen to us. Yeah, it happened to those people, but this is different. Today is different. These times are different. But are they really? And do you want to be caught into that event horizon, or that moment where there is a major transfer or a paradigm shift in what is money? What does the currency represent? How much can it get as far as its purchasing power? I think many times people just ignore it because they think it's either too complex, or they've never really addressed the issue ideologically or scholastically. They've never really studied it. It's one of those topics that seems to be ignored and left out of most curriculums today. Could be on purpose, I don't know. But when you look at precious metals, you cannot ignore their lasting power. And if you were a betting man, which most people are, I mean, life is a gamble, everything's a bet. You know, if you're buying metals, you are placing essentially a hedge or a bet on their ability to preserve your wealth over time. You're not buying it no one buys gold hoping to lose purchasing power. It's just not something people do. But if you were a betting man, and again, we all are, what would you place your wager on? Something that's essentially been around with a track record and a resume for 10,000 years, spanning the entire planet, every culture, every empire, every regime, government, nation state. I mean, essentially always being that one thing that's represented the ultimate extinguisher of debt, the one item, the one atomic particle, that one thing, gold, being that place that people store their labor into, the ability of it to hold that kinetic energy, that where you work and you store your work away and lock it up into whether a gold coin, ingot, or bar, and then unleash it later on for the things that you wish to attain, whether it be land, goods of some kind, bushels of wheat, cattle, a home someplace, or purchasing troops to fund your campaign. It always comes down to that around the world, and again, across time, nearly 10,000 years. Or are you going to place it on something that may have existed for 10 years, 20 years, and if it's really been around for a long time, 30 or 40 years? The modern currency that you use today, the Federal Reserve note, and this dance that we see between the Fed and the Treasury issuing notes, have only really existed in the way they're valued today, the way they're printed and produced digitally now on a screen, because we all know that they don't print every dollar that's actually in, quote, circulation. That's only existed for 40 some odd years, ever since the breakdown and collapse of Bretton Woods. These floating currencies, the world reserve currency, the dollar, having no backing whatsoever, no exchangeability for you to go to a bank to exchange it for gold at any price. There's no, the government has that statutory price we touched on recently. The price, according to the books, by the law, $42.22. There's no ability to do that. We've talked about the Coinage Act, the Constitution, how the founders had essentially mandated that only gold and silver could be coined money. And of course that was not seemed something that was convenient for the powers that ended up seizing control of the republic. So it had to be done away with. Now, are you going to place it on the paper that they issue, your bet, your wealth preservation? Or would you bet it on something that's been around a little bit longer than the 40 years since 1971? And even if you wanted to go back to the founding of the Fed, when the Fed started issuing notes and there was no exchangeability, of course the Fed was founded in 1913, but in 1933 gold was banned from the citizen, here in the United States, that is. Even if you went back just that far, 1933 is not that long ago. It's nothing compared to the lasting and historical staying power of gold. And it is archaeological findings like this, those that we've seen in the Byzantine Empire, the Roman Empire, the coins we've seen found all throughout England. I mean, it's the Greeks. It's just, the list goes on. We've talked about treasures found in the Middle East. Right? Again, throughout human history, it doesn't matter what continent you're on, what culture you find yourself in, it was recognized as the ultimate store of value, the ultimate preserver of wealth, to be transported, to be smuggled, to be hidden away, to be hoarded, to be worked for, and then to be unleashed to purchase whatever it may be at some point later on. Now, going into, we can only look back. It's essentially impossible to draw a line and then say, okay, from this point forward, there's the future. What's going to happen now? What does the future hold and look like? And you get so many opinions out there and so many people that seem to know. Well, I don't think anyone truly knows. Not even myself. I don't know anything. Honestly, I just read things like this and look at history and assume that, well, it's been around for 10,000 years. I'm pretty certain it's going to be there after this experiment that we're living through burns to the ground, which it seems like it already might be doing so. For those holding significant amounts of US dollars, pound sterling, euros, yen, yuan, renminbi, rubles, we are entering perilous times. The currencies around the world, and those that are pegged to the US dollar, are in a state of being increased in supply and printed to fund governments that are failing and fledgling, to support debt loads that are mathematically deemed impossible to be able to address in any way for even generations to come. And as the economic model crumbles, desperate attempts are being made now. Things that were considered fringe theories before are being attempted at staving off economic calamity and currency collapse. Well, I don't trust them, nor should you. I don't think they trust themselves. I don't think the elite and the truly, the very wealthy, who might be even part of the cabal that's orchestrating, and those that are connected to the architects of this madness, I don't even think they trust them. And that's why we see the flows of gold in the directions we see them, the vaulting of gold. And it will continue. This is why I've often said we are entering a multi-decade bull run for gold. It's going to be interesting. It's going to be dynamic. There's going to be some volatility. We're going to see plunges. You'll see pumps. You'll see dumps. You'll see that shell game take place with the ETF flows. You'll see the COMEX claim that it has the gold to provide when the headlines tell us otherwise. I just saw another one the other day. More coin and bars were flown to the United States from vaults in Switzerland than at any time in recent memory, as they loaded planes to try to fulfill contracts, and those who held physical, on paper anyway, and stave off disaster and headlines reading that the COMEX had broke. We all know that there was a significant disruption and a problem there. And I would venture to say that indeed it did break the COMEX. They just covered it up very well. And, well, you saw what they did. We've talked about it enough and at length, and there's enough information out there for you to come to your own conclusion on whether or not the COMEX had the metal they said they had. And I'll go back to a statement I made many years ago, where having COMEX gold, paper gold, it's like having a bar of gold in a room surrounded by, back then I said 4 windows, but let's say 20 windows. And they're telling each individual peering through the windows that cannot see the other individuals that they are the owner of said bar in the middle of that room. And each individual peering through glass cannot see the 20 other individuals looking into the center of that room through the one-way glass. And each believes that bar belongs to them, where it can only be claimed physically by one. The rest will be left with a paper receipt, most likely only redeemable in the currency of the day. So I'll ask you, my friends, viewers, subscribers of the Junius Maltby channel, when you look at your bank statement, or you look at wads of cash that you might have stuffed in your mattress, if you're so fortunate, or if you look at your stock portfolio and you see a dollar sign followed by some digits, maybe a comma and a decimal point or so, what do you place more trust in? Which one do you think will hold value and be there should economic turmoil and calamity or disaster befall the modern West and East, the North and the South? Should the global economy suffer a fate that is more catastrophic than at any point in history, or should there be a disaster just with the US dollar, which one do you think will have the staying power to preserve your wealth going forward? Now, a lot of people say, oh, it's not going to happen in my lifespan. I'm not worried about my posterity. I'm just worried about me in the now. That's all fine and dandy unless you find yourself at that point, at that juncture. If you yourself have to travel on the timeline that passes through such an event, on the other side of it, what will happen? What will your wealth look like? The purchasing power you hold right now could be far different. Your ability to acquire assets in the future, goods, services, anything for that matter, could be drastically reduced. You could go from being a lord to a peasant. Not that there's many lords or barons or individuals of status that tune in here. I know there's some of you that might be a little better off than others, but the point of this is, I think those that have the know, that are in tune with history, are fully aware of what's taking place and are strategically and tactically making moves in a way so as to expose themselves much less to the dollar, to the euro, to the pound, to the yen, yuan, the renminbi, and are taking a much larger position in gold. And for very good reason. Now, the thing about this is history tends to unfold as it wishes and should, and the momentum of it is far greater than you or I. The timeline could be as slow or as fast as it wishes. No one really knows exactly when certain things are going to occur. It's just that some of us tend to tune into the breeze and the weather patterns and can almost smell it on the wind that there is indeed a shift, a sea change occurring. Now, it could be this decade, it could be the next one, it could be next year, who knows? I mean, again, nobody truly can say. And even those that are supposed experts, well, they don't call anything right. We've all seen that time and time again. They're worse than the weathermen. So you can only do what's best for you, what you're comfortable with, and, well, what you truly believe is the right decision to make. And so I leave it up to you what that decision should be. No pressure from me. I don't make a penny off a single cell of a single grain of gold. And of course, it's only one piece of a large puzzle. Gold is not the only important thing in this world. It just so happens to be the topic of conversations that we have here on this channel most of the time. So we'll conclude that article. I'll leave the discussion of this topic to the rest of you down in the mosh pit of the YouTube comment section, where you guys can hash it out and discuss it even further amongst yourselves. I'll chime in when and where I can. But before we fully wrap up tonight's video, I just wanted to share a piece of information here that is kind of exciting. I'm actually humbled and flattered by it. For some peculiar reason, I was asked to attend a podcast for a Mr. James Bradley on the Untold Pacific. And I was taken back and shocked that an individual would wish to have myself on their podcast to discuss this very boring content that we feature here on the most boring channel on YouTube. Mr. Bradley sent me an email and we've been discussing it, and it looks like there may come a time, possibly May 16th, where myself and Mr. Bradley will discuss some of these very topics and issues. So if you get a chance, go check out his podcast. He's got some amazing content on there that I've perused already, some exemplary interviews and wonderful material. So go check it out, The Untold Pacific, James Bradley. Looks like he might be a viewer here, and one of those who takes part in the Junius Maltby channel. So that's, again, something I don't feel I deserve, but I will definitely look forward to an energetic participation in his podcast when that time comes up. So thank you all for tuning in to tonight's installment of the Junius Maltby channel. I hope all of you have a wonderful rest of your evening and week. Don't forget to like the video if you do like the content here, and share it where appropriate. Have a good night, all of you, and thanks to those, especially the Patreons and those who support this channel and keep it motivated and going forward and producing the content that we do. Thank you.